So, friends, we are here to go through an overview of the field of embedded systems, right? And before we begin, let me start by going over what all will be covered here. So, we would go over this topic. We'll start with trying to define what an embedded systems is. Where do we usually find these embedded systems? Why is it so important to learn about these systems, particularly as time goes by? We are entering an era where more and more such systems will surround you. Then we will digress into the more details. Let's talk about types and classifications of the systems. Then we'll go over an anatomy of an embedded system, what exactly goes on inside and what are the parts and pieces of the system. Uh, we also go over we'll go typically used, types of multitaskings which we use. Then we'll do a small case study, sort of case study on a particular product. And then we'll go over some performance parameters that we usually look at when we are evaluating some design decisions and sometimes, the actual market value of these products. And lastly, we will also go over some of the hardware and software skills that are required to work in this field. This field is very interesting because it bridges the gap between pure hardware and pure software, right? And that's how most of the systems work today. So at the last slide would be about some job prospects in this particular field. Okay, so we are trying to define here what exactly is an embedded system. So an embedded system is essentially a group of controlling and actuating and sensing equipments. So generally an embedded system consists of a processor which executes some instructions. Then you'll have memory to hold the instruction and the data, and then you'll have some IO devices, input-output devices. So every component inside the embedded system will have its own specific purpose, right? And most of the times the processor is nowadays it has become more what you say. Most of the times you'll find that these embedded systems have some kind of a microcontroller architecture inside of them, right? And to actually sum up the whole thing, like just the definition of it, the two words that we're using here are the very apt words to actually explain what these systems are. So if you'll see, first word is embedded. So when you say something that's embedded, means it is something inside of a larger system. If it's inside of a larger system, so then by corollary, some things will come up. For example, you would not be able to do general purpose computing on it, just like you do on your PC. It will probably be a very special purpose computer and doing just one thing, but doing it extremely well. That is the whole idea of an embedded system. So you give it a certain purpose and it does that extremely well, and it doesn't do anything else. And because you don't have to do general purpose computing, your system may not be necessarily accessible from outside. Obviously, you will have some or the other way of connecting to the system. You will have some, user interface, maybe some switches, maybe some lamps, the indications, lights, screens, whatever. However, you will not be able to do general purpose computing or anything that it has not been intended to do. Sometimes you also have some configuration abilities, so you can configure your system. So that is possible, but in general, interfaces are quite limited and they are intentionally kept that way. The other word is system. So it is a complete system. That means it's not just the computer. It's not just the memory. It's not just the analog circuit. It is an entire system with different parts. And of course, very important part is software. And all of these parts are actually working together in tandem. So there's one purpose for which you have devised it, and that is what it is doing. So these two words will essentially define embedded systems completely. So they are embedded and they're complete systems. Let us look at it where they are. So if you look around yourself, you will find that they are everywhere, almost everywhere. So some examples that I have put up here are your mouse, your calculators, your health bands that are these days so much, in vogue right now. Then you have soap dispensers, oxygen monitors, right? Your ovens, ACs, your treadmills, cameras, washing machines, and you name it. In fact, I was just going over some statistics last night, and I saw that industry now recognizes that an average home can have more than 100 processors easily. So that's an average home. That's not even something that you have like like an home automation stuff. All that is not available. Even if that is not available, you still would have at least 100 processors inside your home somewhere. So what this tells us is that they are everywhere, and the pace of them surrounding you is actually increasing with time, right? And so why is it so important to learn about them? So the most important part is that they are almost essential parts of your modern day living. When you enter a car, you're actually entering a place where there are multiple systems working in tandem. Each one of them is embedded. You don't know them, but they're all there, right? When you do climate control, when you do ABS on the cars, when you do air conditioning, your music systems, infotainment systems, a lot of that is all embedded systems. When you get out of your car and as soon as you enter your office, you obviously have a watch, right? You have your phone. Now the phone essentially is not anymore an embedded system. It's probably more of a general purpose computing device these days, because they do so much more, and then they also make calls. So that's what phones have become. However, other than that also, there are a lot of things that you use which have embedded systems in them. And as engineers, we should be ready to look at all engineering disciplines with a curious eye. Why is this important? Because for those of you who have just come out of college, or maybe they will come out of college and join the real world industry, you will find that none of the products actually work on a single stream of knowledge. You will find that most of the products are a bunch of a congregation of lot of systems. Now, as engineers working in industry, you may not necessarily you may not be required to know everything. That's true, and that's good in a way, because then your responsibility and liabilities are limited. That's good. But as engineers, you should know some of it for all the systems. That can only come if you have a curious eye, right? You always will have interfaces between different departments, but that doesn't stop you from being curious about each of them. And so this particular field of knowledge brings all these disciplines together. So some examples here, I have given air conditioners, refrigerators, motor driving and things like that. And they're very, these days, these systems are ubiquitous almost. So let's go over to the next part. So now now that we've established that embedded systems is an important field to be in, let's try to figure out what types of systems are actually available. So now, this is coming out of convention. There are no rules here. This is coming out of industry convention. So you generally classify them as either based on complexity, or you classify them based on the timing requirements that these systems will fulfill. So for complexity, you generally have qualitatively 3 different scales, right? A small scale system, a medium scale system, and a really sophisticated system. So when you talk about small scale system, you would have systems which are doing just one small thing and doing it very well. And that is what the purpose in life is. You do this and you do it very well. That's all. When you go to medium systems, you will find that these systems will do more than one thing. For example, let's talk about a fingerprint based attendance system. So a fingerprint based attendance system will look at your fingerprint, right? It will match it with existing databases, right? And once it matches it, it might have multiple things to do. It could probably open a door. It could flash an alarm. It could send this data back to another supervisory system on your, your office computers, which will then take in your attendance, which may be used to figure out what was your work time and all. So these are sort of slightly more complicated systems. And then we go for really sophisticated systems. One of the best examples is your digital camera, the DSLR. So if you have seen, the DSLR is actually a complete, computing system inside. It has to look at the light exposure. It has to look at every single pixel that is being taken up. It has to then also look at the effects that it can produce. And then there's a lot of power management going on inside digital cameras, because you only have so much so much power in your battery, right? It also has to do a flash. It also has to ensure that these days systems, digital cameras come up with their own Wi-Fi outputs. So you can connect your PC to your digital camera over a Wi-Fi network, which the camera has started. And so then what you can do is you can look at the image that the camera is looking at on your screen. So that means there's a real-time data that is flowing between the camera and the screen. Similarly, as an example, if you go over vehicle infotainment systems, if you look at the latest cars that are coming up with, these Android and Apple phone connections on the infotainment system, that particular system does a lot of things. It does climate control, it does navigation, it takes care of the sound, it takes care of a lot of other things. So those are like the really sophisticated systems. And then we go over to another classification, which is essentially based on the timing that these systems have to adhere to. Now, as I said earlier, embedded systems are for a certain purpose. They are not a general purpose computing system. So because they are not general purpose computing systems, they are expected to perform efficiently as far as timing is concerned. Now, this timing requirements generally comes from the type of application you are working with. So let us say that you're working with a blood pressure monitor, right? And so you have a belt that goes over your arm, and there's a small pump that pushes air in, and then there's a heartbeat sensor which starts to sense your heartbeat, and at the same time figures out what pressure the air is being exerted on, right? So this process is real time for you, but for the computer that is inside, it is not really real time. It's an extremely slow process, because if you get to the pressure value a few hundred milliseconds later, it's not going to change that much. And also what you see there is not the quantitative part. You're actually looking at the qualitative aspect of the measurements, right? You're seeing whether what's the ratio, whether the ratio has digressed from the actual, the best ratio, how much it has digressed, right? So the person who's looking at the blood pressure monitor is essentially looking for qualitative outputs. He's not necessarily looking for exact quantitative outputs. So those things are generally called as soft real-time systems, and there's a large amount of systems which are essentially soft real-time. Then there are these hard real-time systems. For example, let's talk about a fighter plane bomb disposal system. Can you afford to miss the bomb disposal by a few milliseconds? Probably not. Probably not, right? There are many such systems where you just cannot afford to miss these deadlines. And why you cannot afford to miss these deadlines is because there's a chain of events that's going to happen based on your response. And all of that chain of events has its own hard real-time requirements. And so in these cases, these systems must follow an absolute hard real-time, and you cannot miss them. And those systems are generally called as hard real-time systems. So now let's look at what typically an embedded system consists of, right? So I have mentioned here 5 different parts of the embedded systems, and central part is obviously the controller, the memory, and the software. I've put them all in one single bunch because there is no standard industry standard on what this block will contain. A lot of these blocks are things that are discrete memories, have discrete processors, and then a software that's running on them. Sometimes they have a microcontroller with everything is inside the microcontroller, the RAM, the ROM, everything is inside the software. Sometimes you also have field programmable gate arrays. So FPGA systems where the FPGA actually implements the microcontroller in hardware and also implements some other auxiliary digital circuits, and then the controller comes into existence. So the first part is the controller. Then the most important part next is the sensors or the user inputs. So what kind of user inputs can you have? So you can have like buttons, dials, switches, sensors for different physical quantities. And then obviously there has to be, once you have the input, then you have to have something which you can actually actuate. So you could have lamps or motors or heating elements or other power conversion circuits to which your embedded system is sending a certain signal. And obviously you also would like to have some kind of an indication for the user. So that comes under display or HMI. And then a large and a huge part is the power source. Now, why is power source so important? You don't really talk about power sources when you're talking on computing systems as such. You focus mainly on the computing part. But here, as you know, this is an embedded system. It might actually be working only on batteries. And so the better your power management is, the higher is the likelihood that it will be successful in doing what it is doing for the period that is expected to work on, right? So then power supply also becomes an extremely important part of it. Analog circuits, which manage this power supply, and sometimes it's managed digitally. It's part of the software and all. So that goes a little deeper. Okay, so let's come to the central part, which is the controller. So now, like I said, right, most of the days, these systems are actually built over a certain microcontroller architecture. And the microcontroller essentially consists of a CPU core, right? And the CPU core itself consists of a small control unit, an arithmetic and logical unit, and a memory unit. So the purpose of this CPU unit is essentially to fetch an instruction from memory, execute it, and then you decode it and execute it, right? So once it executes it, it writes back its results to a certain memory location, or if it has a memory mapped IO, then it will just write it to the IO, but that's slightly not as often. Most of the times it's memory based. Then you would have some kind of random access memory, which is used as scratchpad memory for while you're working. So when the system starts, you will need some memory to do calculations, some memory to do, to fetch instructions, place them somewhere, right? Do some kind of optimization on the memory, things like that. So you will need random access memory for that. This kind of memory generally will not work once there is no power to the system. So this is a RAM memory. Then there has to be some kind of a program memory, right? Where you will have the instructions that have been provided to you as software, that provided to the system as the software is placed. So it's a bunch of instructions one by one, and the CPU is programmed to look for a certain instruction starting at the start, and then go back to it after some time. After doing all the instructions, it goes back to the same place. So that kind of ROM memory, this is generally flash memory. It's very similar to the memory that is used on your pen drives or your SSDs, right, these days. So then there are some places or some architectures which also provide an EEPROM. So what is an EEPROM? It's an electrically erasable, programmable, read-only memory. Now, the thing is that a lot of times EEPROMs are supposed to have better memory retention than regular ROMs. So generally what you will find is that there's a large ROM and then there's a very small amount of EEPROM. So this what software is supposed to do, what it is used for is it will store the most important configuration parameters in the EEPROM, or this data that you actually don't want to lose. That will generally go to EEPROM. Also, the EEPROM is actually addressable directly, which means that you can actually address which memory location, what you want to read, what you want to erase. That's not as easily possible on the ROM-S, because you'll have to go through a lot of software tools to do it. Then there are IO ports, right? So there is a digital IO port that you have on these microcontrollers. It's generally called as GPIO. It is a general purpose input output ports. Then you also have peripherals such as timers, pulse width modulation circuits, analog to digital converters, digital to analog converters, universal asynchronous receive transmit circuits. All of these are called peripherals, and they're essentially connected to the main CPU core through some or the other kind of interconnection bus, which is the last one that I have mentioned. So here, this is essentially a overview of a very famous architecture. It's called the PIC16 architecture. So this is a microchip device, and this is not the exact picture. This is sort of a reduced picture, but you can see that there is a small CPU there. There's a WDT, which is called a watchdog timer. Then there are these ports D and E, right? And then there are these IO ports A, B, C. Then you also have on the left hand side, you will see that there's a red colored bus, which is essentially the data bus, which is connecting the CPU with these peripherals. On the peripheral side, you will see that there are, A to D converters and, capture compare modules, pulse width modules, and serial communication modules, and things like that. On the right side, okay, at the top, you will see that there are some timers. So timers are extremely important for all CPU instructions. And if you go into this field, you will figure out that being good at setting up timers and using them for different purposes will be a hallmark for your ability as an embedded systems programmer. Then you have the memory, and obviously here you have all kinds of memory bunched together. On the topmost side, you will see that there is a thing called SFR, right? These are special function registers. So these special function registers are registers which can set different possibilities for the peripherals. And the CPU actually allows you to set these peripherals to different capabilities using these special function registers. So these are definitely part of the memory, but they are special function because the CPU has direct access to them, and it can essentially use them for doing peripheral activities. You obviously have some kind of a power supply, regulated power supply circuit, and then you have a reset circuit, which essentially brings the CPU back all the way to the start instruction address of the starting instructions. Okay, so inputs. Let's go over inputs. What are these inputs type? So as you can see, you can have buttons, switches. Switches are of multiple types. You can have rotary switches, programmed switches. Then you can have potentiometers. You can also these days have touch screens, and we very often use them these days on embedded systems because everybody wants to have a screen on everything they have these days. So you'll see that your AC remote has a screen nowadays. A lot of times you'll see that your kitchen equipments may have screens on them. So screens are also supposed to be input devices. And then you have inputs which are coming directly about physical quantities. So for example, physical quantities such as proximity or temperature, pressure, humidity, irradiance, a lot of other things that you can have sensors for. There are vibration sensors which are used in seismic devices. Like you must have heard that they say that there was so much Richter scale earthquake, right? So these are basically vibration sensors that are looking at how much vibration is coming in. Then there are also some network inputs. The inputs can also be over the network. You don't necessarily have to have a physical input every time. Okay, and then let's look at the outputs. So outputs typically consists of motor drivers. So motor drive, when I say motor driver, what I mean to say is there's a power converter circuit which is going to drive some motors in a certain fashion, um, and your embedded system is going to provide it the essential signals to drive its motors. Then you can have lamps and indicators. You can have visual and audio outputs. Audio outputs would increase. You would include sirens, hooters, and tweeters, things like that. And then there are very important outputs called relays and contactors. So these are the electromechanical devices which allow a very small microcontroller which doesn't have a lot of power to actually control a much more powerful equipment.